Hello once again, Brian Houston on Rattle and Hum Sports. Time to talk college basketball, specifically the Big 12 with our Big 12 insider, Kevin Lonnquist. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm good, Brian. How are you doing today?
Doing very well, trying to piece together the Swiss cheese that's been made of my NCAA bracket, which is, I admire your wisdom in not filling out one of these things. It saves a lot of aggravation.
Yeah, as I shared with you last week, I said, I stopped doing this about 5 years ago because I didn't want my enjoyment of the tournament to be ruined because my Final Four team got knocked out in the second round or something like that, and then just kind of ruined the experience. And maybe that's a product of my being taking it a little bit too seriously, but at the same time, I've really enjoyed the tournament. Although I would say that the caliber of play isn't what it's normally been because the game is still going through a transitional stage, but it's still been a fun tournament, especially when you get a team like Florida Gulf Coast, the first 15th seed ever in the history of the tournament to make it to the Sweet 16. Those are fun stories.
What you mean you didn't have that picked already?
As a matter of fact, I didn't, but I can tell you this. I can certainly go with Andy Enfield, the head coach, and who he married. Did you see that he married a supermodel a couple of years ago?
Listen, this guy, I hate this man, okay? I mean, he's a multi-millionaire as a private businessman. He's a computer geek, and then he marries a supermodel, and now he's got an NCAA, bracket buster who could end up going to the Final Four if things fall just right. I mean, this guy is living the dream right now.
Hey, don't picture. What if he got? All he's going to do is just kind of hang up over at Cowboy Stadium this weekend. I'm sure his wife, those big jumbotrons at Cowboy Stadium. Plenty of shots on the misses will be forthcoming, I'm sure.
She is the new Catherine Webb.
Exactly.
I really hate this man. I just want you to know this. All right.
Now calm down now. We all get it.
Well, I mean, seriously, he's got everything, and then he's probably going to get, the Duke job next, just because. Just he happened to be in the right place at the right time. So, I mean, congratulations to him. He's got a heck of a basketball team. Let's go through, first of all, the Big 12. When I was doing my radio show, you and I both referred to the Big 12 as Kansas and the 9 Herbs. And for a while there, it looked like maybe Iowa State would get out of that level and step above because they played so great even against Ohio State. But let's talk about the overall performance of the Big 12 and kind of go through which teams really let you down and which teams did about what you expected them to do.
Well, when I put out the story last week on the site about what I thought each Big 12 team was capable of doing, it was kind of odd because I felt like Iowa State, I just didn't like their team at all. And obviously they and Kansas were the only ones to get through to the third round. And you're right, Iowa State played an outstanding basketball game against Ohio State. They probably got a terrible break on a bad offensive foul that should not have been called that Aaron Kraft took, but nonetheless, that's water under the bridge. But I didn't have anybody else getting through the first weekend of the tournament other than Kansas, and I still think the Jayhawks are going to find a way to get to the South. They've got it pretty much set up in their favor to where they can get through either if they can take care of business against Michigan, which I think they can, and they're going to get the winner of Florida and Florida Gulf Coast. As far as the other Big 12 teams are concerned, I think the one disappointment that I had was probably Kansas State. And really, the game's in Kansas City. They're an hour and a half away from Manhattan. They've got a Big 12 Player of the Year performer, I should say, an all Big 12 Player of the Year performer in the Rodney Magruder. And they were awful against LaSalle. Now, LaSalle, there is something to those first 4 games that are being played on the Tuesday and Wednesday before those winners move on to the tournament. They get a little bit of momentum. They've kind of got a routine going, that sort of thing. And Kansas State, who had played on Saturday in the Big 12 championship game, had 5 days of rest before they got to catch LaSalle. Now, LaSalle's not a bad team out of the 18. But when you fall behind by 19 points, in basically your backyard, you have to climb out of a hole, and they actually believe that they should have never put themselves in that type of position to where they were even sweating it down the end to the point where they were even eliminated from the tournament by a close loss. Second one would be Oklahoma State. I thought that they would be ready to handle the tournament. obviously the fact that you've got a lot of freshmen on that team that they're leaning on, and this is where the tournament really shows itself, because you've got inexperienced guys. The tournament is a completely different animal than the regular season, much less the postseason conference tournament. And when you've got so much one and done, even if you were to lose in the Big 12 tournament like they did in the semifinals to K-State, they all knew in the back of their mind they were going to be playing again in the NCAA tournament. Whereas the tournament itself, you lose, you're out, and your season is abruptly halted. And I think maybe that's where those kids just didn't handle it very well. They got behind a very good Oregon team who's still playing right now. And they looked bad speed, too, by the NCAA tournament selection committee. But the fact that they just did not handle that situation very well, that's what I was even disappointed with. With Oklahoma, I can kind of see that coming. They were stumbling towards the stretch. They lost their last 3 games. They lost at TCU, then they lost to Iowa State in the Big 12 tournament, and then they lose to San Diego State up in Philadelphia. And the Sooners just were kind of looking into the tournament, and it's kind of what you see from a Lon Kruger coach team when he gets that second year under his belt, that they are getting better, but there's still some growth issues that they've got to deal with.
Right.
They just were never really able to push the Aztecs to the point where the Aztecs felt like they were ever going to find a way to lose the ball games, and they just kind of kept the Sooners at arm's length. And so this will be something that Lon Kruger can build on, that he can point to the fact that we got to the tournament, now we want to take the next step and make a deeper run. And he's got that program moving in the right direction.
What?
And before I forget, with Kansas, what am I thinking here? With Kansas, with the Jayhawks, we talked about Kansas State in its playoff. I mean, Kansas had the same playoff against Western Kentucky, and don't let Western Kentucky's record fool you or their seeding. They were a 16th. That's a really good team. They really played hard, and they had the Jayhawks sweating for most of that game. That thing wasn't decided until about the last 38 seconds that Friday night. And the one thing that won the game for Kansas was the defense. I mean, the Jayhawks played incredible defense, and that's what helped them in the second or the third round game against North Carolina. They just shut down the Tar Heels, and the whole holding them to 26 points. And we saw Jeff Whitney and Travis Rutherford really put the team on their back in the second half against the Tar Heels, and why they're still playing. Now, what the Jayhawks have got to do moving into the Sweet 16 is that they got to get their freshman performer Ben McLemore going, because he's really been shaky in these first 2 games.
And one of the things that bothers me about Kansas is they kind of turn it on and off as they need to. And it seemed like they needed to have somebody slap them in the face before they woke up against North Carolina. But good Lord, when they woke up, it was incredible. The turnaround they made from the first half to the second half in that game against UNC was amazing.
You're right about that. And Phil Self made the comment that if that game is being played anywhere other than Kansas City, they probably have a tougher time trying to rally in that game. For some reason, their energy was real flat in the first half. They just couldn't. Their motion wasn't very, very good at all. I mean, they were not hitting the glass like they should have been doing. They just had a lot of things that were kind of making your head scratch. I mean, it kind of goes back to what you saw in that TCU game when they lost in Fort Worth back in February. But we saw the Kansas team that really, really is the one that deserves the number 1 seed. And when they played that second half, and again, I go back to the point I made a few moments ago about how well they played defensively. When they lock you down, they really can suffocate you. That's why I think their field goal defense, if it is the number 1 in the country, it's like in the top 5.
One other thing, and I don't mean to be overly critical of Kansas, but I do think that once they started to make the turnaround, I believe you could see North Carolina just kind of cave in. I don't think Michigan's going to do that. Michigan, to me, was one of the maybe top 2 or 3 most impressive teams I saw over the weekend. The performance they had against VCU, and VCU played great defense. They weren't knocking down shots, but they were playing great defense, and Michigan would make these runs, and they had so much speed. I'm just not sure I see Kansas being able to lock them down like that.
Well, I mean, the question that the Jayhawks are going to have, and this is going to be a really tough test for Rutherford and for Ben McLemore, is how they are going to guard Michigan's 2 guards with Trey Burke, who's the Big Ten Player of the Year, and also Tim Hardaway Jr. And then you got a swingman by the name of Glenn Robinson III, who's the son of the former Purdue Boilermaker. Great, where those kids, there's a lot of, there's some good genes that run around that program that John Beeline's got at Michigan. Keep in mind, the Wolverines were number one in the country back in February.
I know.
And they finished, second in the Big Ten race by 2 games, I think it was. If they had beaten Indiana in the regular season finale back in the first weekend of March, they would have had a share of the Big Ten championship. So Michigan's really, really good. This is Wolverine's first appearance in the Sweet 16 since, I believe, 1994. They're very well coached. They're going to spread you out. They're going to play. They're going to shoot 3-pointers. They've got some pretty good inside presence. I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Kansas. They can do it. The Big Ten's a really good conference. It's the best conference in the country this year. I don't know if the Big Ten's going to produce a national champion, but Michigan, I think Michigan can absolutely win the game.
And the one team I do believe that probably should be playing on should be Iowa State. They played a great game against Ohio State. Aaron Kraft, hits that cold-blooded 3 at the end of the ball game when he really hadn't played a real good ball game the whole way up until that point. But Iowa State looked tremendous against Ohio State.
Yeah, well, Aaron Kraft, you just mentioned the difference in the game. He's just the only word that comes to my mind when I watch Aaron Kraft, and I talked about him last week, Brian, is the only word that comes to my mind on him is winner. The kid just finds a way to get it. He's probably one of the best on-ball defenders in college basketball. He's just a difference maker. And yes, he did struggle quite a bit, but then when the game was on the line, he made a tremendous. I don't know how he worked. That screen that was set for him before he hit the 3-point shot was not a great 3-pointer, but I don't know why Iowa State was giving him enough room to even take the shot.
Neither do I.
A 3-point shot is a lower percentage shot. But at the same time, if you want to give a kid like him that of a look, that's the only fault I had with the Cyclones on that play. I mean, I thought that they probably should have played him a little bit tighter to force him to give it up a little bit. But, like I had mentioned, Brian, with about 1:41 to go in the game, Iowa State's up 75-74, and they've got Will Clyburn going to the basket where he's going up for a layup on a potential 3-point play. Kraft comes over and is late. He's definitely late coming in to call the charge, but the referees get that, call the charge, and that completely flips the game. I mean, you go from 77-74, maybe 78-74 to 75-74 with Ohio State with the ball, and then the Buckeyes score the last 4 points of the game. So, and of course, 3 with 0.2 seconds you got to win it. So, I don't think the Cyclones have anything to be ashamed of. But the problem was that they just did not make. They got a bad break on that offensive foul, but then they didn't play great defense and crowd Kraft when he took the shot.
Which leads to what your comment earlier about the quality of play in this tournament. What do you make of the way the basketball game is being played on the college level right now? A lot of calls where guys can get up under an offensive player when they drive to the basket, and they call a block or a charge, rather, I say on that. When the guy obviously has stepped up under a player who's driving. There was a time, I think, where there was a flagrant foul in one ball game where a player was swinging the ball up above his head. But, there was a body on body, and he had nowhere to go, and the referees are not giving them any room offensively to make a move. What's your feeling about the way things are going and the style of play in the tournament overall?
Well, the scoring is down in the tournament. I mean, and that's what I talk about. The great story about Florida Gulf Coast is a great story. But the overall caliber of the tournament is nothing extraordinary. The scoring, as I said, has been a little bit of a problem. I mean, you've seen a lot of scores that are in the 50s and the low 60s, which people say, well, that's college basketball. Yeah, but you can still play it a lot better. I mean, there was the game between Miami, Florida, and Illinois on Sunday night when it was 63-59 Hurricanes. That was a pretty good game. But, Indiana Temple, that was kind of painful to watch, and the Hoosiers won 58-52. Even Creighton and Duke Sunday night, that was really a tough watch just because the shots are not looking good. And this is where the game is being hurt as far as a lot of the one and dones, that these kids are not staying in school to where programs are being developed, and they're kind of like they're like being hired to play for a year before they take off to the NBA. That's really hurting the game. You talked about the block charge calls and the flagrant calls. Obviously, the block charge, that's always going to be a judgment call. The official is going to be darned if you do, darned if you don't get it right.
Right.
But as far as like the flagrant rule is concerned, it's great that the officials are using the monitor to look at something like that to determine if a flagrant one, which is kind of like just one of those incidental things, but you did it anyway, to the point where a flagrant 2 means to your expulsion from the game. But some of those situations, I think you're going to see the NCAA Rules Committee review that. There's been a lot of talk that they would do that anyway. To kind of use a little bit better judgment. I think the rule right now kind of handcuffs the officials and forces them to not use any judgment. They want to take the judgment out of that call. If a player swings his elbow, then it's going to be this, and it leads to 2 free throws. And I think that you've got to use a little bit of common sense. And I think that's kind of typical, too, of what happens when you get a rule, something like this, implemented for the first year. That it's going to be a hard interpretation. You want to see how it's being called for the course of the year, and then make your proper adjustments in the following season. So I think next year they'll probably do a better job of making sure that the rules interpreted correctly, and actually using more common sense on it.
I'll throw one other thing out at it. My good friend Danny Casper at Stephen F. Austin says the bottom line is all these things that you just mentioned are all valid. He said, but the bottom line is kids today just do not work on just shooting the basketball like they used to. These kids they all shoot the threes, but none of them can shoot mid-range jumpers. A lot of them are poor free throw shooters now. They just don't work on shooting the basketball now like they used to on their own.
Yeah, Danny's absolutely right. I've said this. I've talked to coaches over the last 5-6 years about this, where the mid-range jumper, which I would define as anywhere from about 10 to 14 feet, that's kind of dead in today's college game, where no one knows how to hit that shot. And if a player had worked on that, more players had worked on it, it'd be such more dangerous offensively. And the sad thing about it is that these kids just fall in love with the three-point shot. They don't work on their defense very well. And the reason why the scoring is down is because, again, the shooting percentages are down. It's not so much a product of the defense as it is the kids just aren't as well skilled offensively. And so it all kind of comes together. And really, this is a generation of basketball kids that we're starting to see it now. The fact that they weren't working on those jumpers in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, and now they've made their way into the college game. We're starting to see it become a real issue.
And that's one of the reasons why you see the foreign players doing so well right now, is because they still work on those aspects of the game that our kids just don't work on right now.
Exactly.
All right, a couple of other things to talk about just in relation to that. I know you're a big Minnesota Gopher fan, and Tubby Smith made some noise in the tournament, and then he was rewarded by being fired. And then Ben Howland at UCLA goes to the tournament every year, takes him to 3 straight Final Fours, and wins the regular season Pac-12 championship this year, rewarded by being fired. What's your take on all of this?
Actually, I think both of them are pretty well justified. If you look at Ben Howland's career at UCLA, the first 5 years were really, really good. You mentioned the 3 consecutive Final Fours between 06 and 08. And in the latter 5 years, where I think they missed the tournament, 3 out of the last 4 years or something to that effect, couldn't get out of the first round. And I think this was like the longest stretch that UCLA has ever gone through by not going to the Sweet 16. They won the Pac-10, they won the Pac-12 regular season championship. There were just a lot of issues with Shabazz Muhammad today, with his eligibility, and then now the story's been breaking about his age, really not being 19 to 20. And of course, the Bruins during the Pac-10 tournament or Pac-12 tournament when they lost Jordan Adams, who might be arguably their best player. He broke his foot in the semifinal game against Arizona. I think it was the last play of the game. That really handcuffed the Bruins. So the Bruins came into the tournament really on thin ice, and there were a lot of questions about Ben's job security. And sometimes in today's college environment, if you've been at a place for 10 years, you probably may have reached your end. There's differences, maybe like Bill Self or Mike Krzyzewski or Jim Boeheim or Roy Williams. But outside of that, you're not going to see these coaches that are going to be sticking around for very long, because this really is a transient type of profession that we're watching. As far as Minnesota is concerned, it's great that the Gophers did win their first tournament game under Tubby Smith, which actually turned out to be his last win. But this was a team team that clearly underachieved on him. They went 8-10 in the Big Ten. It was thought that this was going to be the best team that he's had all year. I mean, consider this. On December 31st, they were ranked 9th in the country. They had wins over Stanford and Memphis. They lost. Their only loss was there was a tournament down, I believe, in the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico, one of those places that they're off the island around Thanksgiving. So they looked really, really good in the way they were playing. And everyone kind of thought that Minnesota had turned a corner in their Big Ten opener against Michigan State at Williams Arena when they were down 7-8 points with about 7 minutes to go. They rallied to win the game. And everyone thought, okay, maybe they actually have turned the corner. They got off to a 3-0 start, and then all of a sudden the roof caved in. Like they had losses at Northwestern. They had a terrible loss at Iowa by 25 points. Got blown out of Ohio State. Lost at home to Illinois. They went on the road. And, they followed up their upset over number 1 Indiana with back-to-back road losses at Michigan, at Nebraska, and at Penn State. And they just, at Purdue. They got blown out at Purdue, and then they lost the Big Ten opening tournament game to Illinois. And they just did not live together. There were some issues there that they just never played cohesive basketball. And you put that all together with the fact that you've had a new AD coming on board, which they did with Norman Teague, who came on in the summer. Somebody was going to have to really make a deep run in order to keep his job. And when they looked at against Florida in their third-round game last Sunday, I thought to myself when the game was over, well, this is going to go either way. They're either going to announce within 48 hours that he's going to stay, or they're going to announce that they're making a change. And they went the latter direction. And now, as of today, there's a lot of talk about them